Now, today is the anniversary of the first case of COVID-19 in South Africa. On the 5th of March, a traveller who had arrived home from Italy tested positive. That was in 2020. 2 days later, the second case of COVID-19 was confirmed. By the end of March last year, a state of national disaster had been declared, and President Cyril Ramaphosa had announced the first 21-day lockdown. Fast forward by a year, science has delivered vaccines. It's been slow, but South Africa is now rolling out. We're in the first phase. Let's get an update. We're joined by Professor Helen Rees, who is the chair of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. Professor, thank you for being with us. Firstly, there is some political controversy. I don't know if you're willing to comment on that, what happened in Parliament that we're reporting on. I think that government was pretty upfront in briefings that we took live. The health minister and the scientists involved said that there will be a rollout with vaccines that have been used in trials. They're still technically in trial phase, and that's why we can give the jabs before South African regulatory authorities have approved. So now it's a matter of, is this technically a trial or a rollout or both? In your mind, does it actually matter?
Well, it does matter in terms of regulation, but I think, let me explain, because I think there is a lot of confusion out there. The fastest way, because we had this difficulty with AstraZeneca, we wanted to really roll out the vaccines, particularly to healthcare workers. So the fastest way to do that was through a clinical trial approval, and there were vaccines available that had been manufactured for the Johnson & Johnson trial. Remember that South Africa had been a major country contributing to the data of that trial. So what was done was, and it's not at all uncommon, was that what was called a 3B trial was designed, and that's what's happening now. So we already have data that has already been reviewed, for example, by the FDA, and that's coming through to SAPRA from this phase 3 trial, which showed us effectiveness, and that was reported on in the media firstly, and now there are submissions to regulatory authorities. But it showed us that the vaccine worked. It also showed us that although the vaccine worked well against severe disease in South Africa, that it worked about 64% effectively against our variant. Now, that's one of the few vaccines that's actually got data against our variant. And so that was encouraging, even though it's not as effective against the first virus. But let's come back to the 3B trial. Very often when you have data from a phase 3, those great big clinical trials that show whether a vaccine does or doesn't work, when you have that data, there's very often a gap between saying, yes, I've got something that works, and then having it licensed for use. Because the manufacturers then have to do a lot around manufacturing, they have to apply to the regulatory authority, and so there's a gap. And very often to stop that gap, we use what's called a 3B open label study. We take out the placebo, we don't have a placebo, we don't have the dummy vaccine any longer because we've shown that it's working. And so we have a rollout phase where it's still under a trial permit, if you like, from the regulator, but we're giving the vaccine and we're continuing to collect data on safety and efficacy. And that's very common. This isn't strange at all. And then as soon as we get enough data in, the regulator, SAPRA, is going to be looking then at the J&J vaccine and deciding whether we either have enough time and enough information for full licensure, or whether once again we'll give a conditional licensure so that we can roll the vaccines out. So the answer is yes, it's a trial, but it's a different sort of trial. There's no placebo. We are collecting data, and it allowed us to get vaccines out to healthcare workers very rapidly.
So the questions politicians have, and I think it's an interesting one. So healthcare workers right now are receiving a jab, and this is still technically a trial. So are their details taken down, and are they followed regularly to enhance the data? So will scientists be watching to see who develops light or serious illness of COVID-19 or nothing at all?
No, and it's a very good and a very fair question. And I think it's good that politicians are asking these questions because they're a reflection of the public. And if we haven't done a good enough job yet at explaining, we must keep explaining. And the answer is yes, we are collecting that data. We're collecting data on safety on side effects, and we're collecting data on hospitalizations. We're very fortunate in South Africa that we have a very good system to be able to look at hospitalization, which is a reflection of severe disease. And we can match that data to the laboratory data and now to the vaccination data. So we'll be able to put all of that data together and say, is the vaccine working? And it's particularly important because of our variant. We're saying it time and time again. Yeah. We must make sure that vaccines are working well in the context of our variant. So yes, we are collecting that data and we will be looking at that data.
Yeah. Look, and I think most people welcome the fact that vaccines are being rolled out in whatever fashion. But maybe, is it a cynical view or not that government is actually circumventing perhaps those regulatory processes that we have? I didn't realize it was so easy to actually circumvent that, or are they slow that they can't keep up in a pandemic?
Government hasn't circumvented anything, and if we did, SAPRA would be onto it very quickly and not approve it. So just remember that the regulatory authority approves lots of different things, but we approve all the clinical trials.
Can I just clarify, Professor, by that I meant that we're giving the vaccine even though it's not approved in South Africa under the auspices of a trial. So it's a way to give something that's not approved. Maybe circumvent was the wrong term, but it's certainly not approved for use.
It is approved for use. It's approved as a clinical trial. So all the clinical trials that occur in the country have to be approved by SAPRA, and they have to be approved by ethics committees, local ethics committees. So it is approved for use, but as a 3B trial. You're quite right, it isn't approved either for conditional emergency use or for full licensure yet, but as soon as and that takes a bit longer because we have to have more data for that. So it's approved for use by the regulator as an open label study with all of the requirements for that study, and that data is being collected. But what we want to do, obviously, is to move on as quickly as we can to be able to give a different sort of approval, which will be this conditional licensure probably, or a full licensure later on.
All right, let's move to how it's going. We've put up the target on our screen, 67 million people by the end of the year. Remember, the best case scenario is herd immunity. I think we're at 91,000, so it seems like a drop in the ocean. What's your view on how the rollout is going?
Well, I mean, one of the downsides of doing this is a 3B trial. I mean, there's an upside and a downside. The upside is that we're learning very quickly what it takes to roll out vaccines, and those lessons can be taken into the broader rollout when we move from this circumstance into a rollout, which we hope to do very quickly. The downside is that when you do a trial, it takes longer because there are more procedures that need to be done. Different types of counseling are required, and so it does take longer. So we're learning. It is taking longer because it's a trial, and the rollout will take all those lessons and will be a quicker process. But it is a very ambitious goal. I mean, to hit the targets that we want to hit is highly ambitious. But every province has got a provincial plan now. And we're also looking with the national department at what sort of support can we offer to provinces. There might be districts that have particular difficulties and need additional support. Yeah. So there are all sorts of, there's a lot of thinking going on. Is it ambitious? It's highly ambitious. But, and can we pull it off? Well, perhaps not in the numbers of millions. But I think that to get many millions of people by the end of the year immunized is doable. And it's certainly, it's a target that we should certainly aim for.
All right, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much, Professor Helen Rees, Chair of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority.